And happy Tuesday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on BlazeTV, radio, and podcast. Under invasion from a swarm of wasps, equipment that will not work, but you won't notice any difference. I mean, the standards for this program are already pretty low. It's quite possible you're looking at me in this studio for the last time, at least until it's like 40 degrees outside. I'm just about at my wit's end with this. Don't know that I can even trust the landlord or not. They tell me, they come in, they look at it. Doesn't seem to make a difference. 5 minutes ago, had one go right over the course of my nose. You know it's bad when Erzin, of all people, when Todd is like...
I'm ready, man.
Yeah, Todd is the one who's like, you should get out of here and not do the show here today. You know it's bad. You know it's bad. Because Todd would be the first one to just say, man up, right? So if Todd is the one saying, you probably shouldn't be in here. Screw that. You know, if I get stung, I guess I'll just own this building after I'm done suing the people that own it for not doing their damn job for the last 3 years. So, and, you know, I'll probably be dead, but my kids will get a nice inheritance, so that'll be cool. But we will figure this out. Aaron, do we have a montage yet?
No.
None.
We're getting flanked on all sides.
No, I just, 2 hours of work just up in flames because Premiere and Media Encoder just want to fart.
So no hope of a montage then?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well,
I can't export it. It won't let me export it anyway.
This could be the last show. I might be dead by the end of it. Straight up, there is a possibility I will be dead at the end of this show. It's not very high, but it's not zero. Fair? It's not zero. It might be 10, 15%, but it's not zero. Who knows what you will see, what will work, what won't. Okay. It's almost as if the Lord is saying, get out of that building. You've been in there for too long. And you should have gotten out of there months ago.
I think we need to consider our metrics. Does our viewership go up if your life is on the line on a daily basis? Let's ponder the coattails.
That could be the ultimate clickbait right there.
Well, maybe.
I mean, if you want to talk about engagement farming on a day-to-day basis, it could be literally the end of me at any particular point in time. That could occur.
I do have an update.
Yes.
I restarted the computer, and it's installing updates.
That could take a while.
I'm giving it all she's got, Captain.
8%.
So let's talk about what may or may not be on the show today, depending on how long I live and depending on whether any of Aaron's equipment actually works. We were mildly surprised that the mics turned on. What the hell happened in here for the 4 days that we were gone?
I don't know.
Yeah, because none of us were here. All right. Saboteurs. Right.
Whatever exorcism took place during the making of Nefarious, is it like run its course? Do we need to have round two?
We may need another one. I mean,
bring it.
Prayer warriors right now may need to be praying for a hedge of protection around this.
Bring it.
Todd looks like the guy with the leprechaun flute in Alabama, ready to go after the leprechaun.
Ready to go, Dad.
Yes, we may need a prayer of a hedge of protection, not even parody. A hedge of protection around the studio here, and maybe a prayer for a hedge of protection that this show actually even gets done today.
Can you imagine at Blaze headquarters or whenever? He's like,
yes. And I'm not even exaggerating. I mean, if Erzin is the one telling me 15 minutes ago, get out of here and go home, that should give you an idea of where things are at. Okay, but I'm just too damn stubborn now. Now I'm just pissed off. Okay, so I'm thinking if I do get stung, I've got enough adrenaline going right now. It'll give the EpiPen maybe another 10 minutes or so. But straight up, if I do get stung, the EpiPen is right here. And then dial 9. One of you guys stick me with it right in my thigh. All right. And then one of you dial 911 immediately. Straight up. No lie, no joke. Okay. If that happens. Okay. All right. Coming up on the show here today, maybe. We'll see. Our colleague Steve Baker will be here. On the program at the bottom of the hour with the latest on his investigative work. For Idolatry or not, I want to get into a note I received from a pro-life activist over whether or not life is a federal issue or not. And a lot of this came up over the weekend. President Trump listening to his base, and I think there's some lessons there. We can talk about that here in a few minutes if Aaron's montage doesn't work. But President Trump listening to his base, giving the message on Amendment 4 that he really could have given 2, 3, 4, 5 months ago and just avoided any kind of a feedback loop or skirmish within his own base whatsoever, which is, hey, I overturned Roe. I said I was going to do that. And I think the state should decide and the voters should get to decide what they think about this issue that's been taken off the table from the democratic process for 50 years. In my home state of Florida, however, we have a bill where the Democrats and George Soros are trying to make it possible that you can kill a baby whenever you want, anytime you want, for any reason you want, as long as the cuticle of the pinky toe is still dangling out of its mother's birth canal. And I'm going to vote no on that because I'm like 80% of Americans that think there should be, that don't think there shouldn't be any restrictions on abortion whatsoever. Could have just given that statement weeks, months ago, for whatever reason, chose not to. But he did, and did largely because of pressure from his own base, which is a good sign, by the way. I mean, we're living in a day and age, folks, where the amount of people you're going to get to vote for whose convictions line up with yours, it's going to be a scant resource, okay? I mean, it's going to be very scarce. And by the way, it's always been that way on existential issues in every society thereabouts. Even at the founding of the country, what are the estimates? Something like 30, 40% of the American colonials were actually with the revolutionaries. Another 30 or 40% were with the loyalists, and the rest just wanted to be left alone and didn't care. I mean, there's really nothing new under the sun. That dynamic exists all through human history. The ratios change depending on how well or sick a culture is, but you're still going to be always left with most of the time in a fallen world, you're going to be left with a plurality of people who either don't want to be bothered or are on the wrong side of a morally existential issue. History has demonstrated this, right? And that's why Samuel Adams, the famous saying of Samuel Adams, it's always been the tireless minority that's always exacted the most societal change and reform, right? Okay. I mean, there was only 110 Jews in an upper room who were still hiding out and holding out in their faith in Yeshua as Messiah. They only changed the world, right? Right. So that's not much different. You're always going to have leverage points where you can get people to do things for you, because if they don't fear God, then the next thing they need to fear is whom? You, the people. And that happened with the former president over the weekend. So we'll find out in a few minutes if Aaron's montage will work. If not, I'll just go right into breaking that down here in a few minutes. But I want to talk more about the life issue, and is it really a federal issue or a state issue? We'll get into that for idolatry or not. Now, why is that an idolatry or not? Because I want us to discuss this strategically, all right? Is it a false objection to say just leave it to the states, or is this a legitimate strategic position? That's what I want to discuss. I want us to flesh out the false objection. Who is just saying that as a cop-out, right? Like the libertarian moment we all were told we were getting 10 years ago was really just a whole bunch of Republicans that didn't want to have an opinion on gay marriage. And so they just re-identified as libertarians. And then when it came time for them to demonstrate their political views, it was pretty much the same views Republicans have had for decades. They just didn't want to argue about gay marriage because it was controversial.
Well,
okay?
At least we put that behind us, Steve, and have had a great 10 years since then.
That's true. Everything's worked out.
Yes.
Everything's gone great in America since we crossed that Rubicon. Indeed. All right. So that's why I want to put it in idolatry or not. Is there a legitimate strategic argument here? Now, there is at least some, because our opponents right now are not attacking us on the federal level, are they? Where are they attacking us? They're attacking us on the state level. So there is clearly some strategic benefit here to fighting this out in the states. But I saw a lot of people who, if you told them, hey, Trump is going to just abandon Israel, so just take it. Just take it. We got to win. Trump's going to abandon Israel. The polls show a majority of Americans don't want to fight a war with Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah over Israel. So, we're just going to abandon Israel. We got to win the election. Something tells me at least some of the people that were like, you pro-lifers just need to take it. We need the W. Wouldn't have the same position if that was their pet issue, right? If Trump just said, we're just going to go ahead and confiscate all the guns. I've got really no position on that. And if they want to take the guns, that's a you problem. I guess we'll just let every state decide if there's a Second Amendment or not, right? I'm guessing that a lot of the people that were just telling the pro-lifers just, suck it up and take it would suddenly, lock and load politically
There's
speaking.
At least a dozen issues like that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's interesting. It's always interesting that you can always tell people, where they really are and on the issues they're willing to sacrifice. Never forget this about politics. You are the hills you are willing to die on in politics. That's who you are ultimately. You are the hills you're willing to die on. And if you want to know why we've lost so much ground over the last couple of decades, what hills have we been willing to die on the right? None. We're always the side that says, shut up, we got to win the next election. The other side just does whatever it wants with reckless abandon, pursues color revolution on a every day that ends in Y basis. And who's the one that's at the very least is pulling the strings and whose paradigm is being fought within here? Not ours, right?
Right.
So we'll get into that with idolatry or not. And then finally, Pop Culture Tuesday. I saw the Reagan movie over the weekend. One of the most bittersweet movie-going experiences I've had in recent memory. Man, I'll get into that a little bit later on as well. First, a word from our friends over at MD Hearing. Are you still paying thousands of dollars for hearing aids that don't even work right? I let my stepdad, Jim, try an MD Hearing aid a couple of years ago. He has been raving about it ever since. Now, what is MD Hearing? It's an FDA-registered rechargeable hearing aid, but it costs a fraction of what typical hearing aids cost. MD Hearing's Neo model cost over 90% less than clinical hearing aids. The Neo fits inside your ear, so no one will ever know if it's there. MD Hearing just launched the Neo XS as well. That's their smallest hearing aid ever. How do they do this? How does MD Hearing manage to do this at a fraction of the cost? They were founded by an ENT surgeon who saw how many of his patients needed hearing aids but could not afford them, and so he made it his mission to develop a quality hearing aid that everyone could afford. So get the hearing you deserve with MD Hearing. Go to shopmdhearing.com. Use the promo code Steve to get their new $297 when you buy a pair offer. Plus, they are adding a free extra charging case. That's a $100 value just for listeners of this show. That's shopmdhearing.com and use our promo code Steve and get their new $297 when you buy a pair offer. All right, are we going to have a montage? Let's make the call.
Nope.
All right, so let's move on. Let's have a little ad hoc political science class here, shall we?
Okay.
So how do you do political activism in negative world? Well, one group of people can just hang out on X all day with anonymous screen names and act as if it's not a negative world, that they still represent some kind of silent majority, and you have to actually check every one of their boxes down to the last syllable and punctuation mark, otherwise you're not worthy of a vote.
That sounds familiar.
That is one way to do this, right?
It appears to be the way.
That appears to be the way, at least to a vocal. I have no idea how significant, but a vocal contingent of the political right on X right now. All right, many of them with references to Florida and DeSantis in their profiles as Ron DeSantis goes on and does whatever he can to help Donald Trump win the election. All right. Anyway, but that's not the real world. X isn't the real world, and we have to understand what life is like in a negative world. Now, let me say this from the outset, though, because I don't want to contradict what I just said, because what I said a few minutes ago about we have no hills to die on the right is very important. All right, but what are the right hills to die on? What are issues of conviction? So the things that are in my closed hand. And then what are issues of position? So things that are in my open hand. Okay? Like today, I made a closed hand, open hand decision before the show. Todd told me to go home and just pick up the show from, they take over, pick up the show. Now imagine not knowing that Aaron's computer and everything wasn't going to work. Imagine what had happened if I had done that. Okay. And I'm just now probably logging on by the time I get home and get everything hooked up, right? Okay. This would have put you guys in a really difficult position. It would have made the show even more cringeworthy than it was however we started it. Okay. Now, why did I make that decision? Because in my closed hand, I thought the show's mission was more important than the risk of a sting. And so I made that decision. Because after all, we're all going to die at some point. I mean, I don't want to get stung by a bee. It's not, my wife is probably really wishing I had gone home right now, and my kids, when they listen to this later, will probably wish the same. Okay, But ultimately, the death rate remains 100%, right? It remains 100%. How many more opportunities do you get in life to know you have a platform of this magnitude to do things that you think lines up with your worldview and could have a positive impact on the world around you and the people that are tuned in, right? You're only going to get so many of those opportunities. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to like do this live from Compton at 2 a.m, okay, wearing a white sheet, okay, and no Kevlar. I mean, I'm not going to be stupid about it, right? Now, if we open the studio up and there was a swarm of bees, this is tying into my point, I promise. If we open the studio up today and there was a swarm of bees, the risk ratio would be too high, right?
Yes.
And at that point, we would just say, there's nothing courageous happening about doing the show in this environment, Steve. If you walk in there, you're just going to get what you deserve. You're an idiot. You're a moron, right? Now, you may still think that. But if we're just talking about a straggling wasp here or there every 15 or 20 minutes, and I've got 2 grown men here next to me that can keep an eye on things and help me out just in case, the risk is not 0 that one of these will not land on me and sting me right away. It's certainly not 0, right? It's probably not 50% though, right? Okay. And then after that, it then becomes a calculus at that point. I'm making a calculated risk that the odds that in this large room, one of these wasps will land on me and sting me right away before I see it or you see it is a calculated risk given the importance of what I think doing this show is for what I believe, right? I'm making a calculated risk. I'm broadcasting in a negative world. I don't own this building, do I? I don't own it.
No.
I don't have, even if I wanted to, my lease would not allow me to call out my own exterminating team. I don't have access to the ventilation system. I don't have roof access. I don't have access to unlock the HVAC system. So even if I called my own extermination team, I wouldn't have the access necessary from this building for them to actually act in the way that I would supervise them directly to do so, right? So I'm in a negative world here. I'm not in control of this building. I don't own this building. I'm not in control of its systems. We aren't even in control of necessarily all of the technology, right? So we're not streaming live on X right now because of technological issues. We had no montage right now because of technological issues, right? All right. Those are things that we are not directly in control of. Meaning that we can prevent them from happening. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Follow me here so far. All right. So then everything becomes, in negative world, everything becomes a calculated risk. Now, part of that calculation is this, though, especially if you're a believer. All right. Ultimately, I'm going to be dead a lot longer than I was alive. And we all are. This world is not our home, right? It's a temporary staging area. And so the calculated risk doesn't necessarily come with as much about offending the world system that has created this negative environment, but offending ultimately the one who created the world itself. Fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Which means there will be times where for the believer, and the math won't work for unbelievers, you won't be able to explain it to them. They won't understand. But there will be times that you will have to say no. Oh, I know. I know what the consequences of no are. You're not telling me something I don't know. For example, if you were like, Trump isn't pro-life, he never apologized for the vaccines, I can't vote for that. And you understand the consequences of what'll happen if these people win. And your conscience says, but I just can't get there, brother. What do you think my answer to that would be?
You got to go your own way.
You got to go, hey, got to pull the Fleetwood Mac here, brother. I hear you. Go your own way. Don't agree with you, but I got your back and I'll defend your right to conscience. If you say to me, well, I don't think she's that bad. We can withstand the next 4 years. Trump would be even worse. What am I going to say to that?
That's dumb.
That is beyond dumb. That's the equivalent of me coming in here with a bee allergy and doing the show with a swarm of bees all over the place. It's just stupid. Now, again, are the odds 100% that I will get stung in that scenario? No. But are they way higher than 50% I'm going to get stung in that scenario? Are they way higher than I'm going to end up in the hospital in that scenario, right? And if I get stung in that scenario, how much sympathy would my audience have for me that I put doing a 2-hour show ahead of the fact that my studio was overcome by a literal swarm of bees? See what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. There wouldn't be nearly as much sympathy as, you know what, man? I'm just going to sit here, do the show, do my best, and one out of nowhere flies into this 600 square foot space and just happens to sting me when there were 599.99 other square feet it could have landed on. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So this is, again, now I told you I was going to bring this home and tie this all together. We're doing it, right? We're making it work, right? You sticking with me here at least a little bit, okay? We're in a negative world. You have to accept this. If you don't, then you're doing the same premise of the people who think they can change their gender. You haven't gone as far as them. All right? You're not as depraved as they are by scale, but your premise is the same. You are denying the reality of the world we're in right now. As is the person who says, God didn't make me this way, or he made a mistake. That person's denying reality. If you are denying we are in a negative world, so are you. In a negative world, you're going to have to often get people to do things they really don't want to do because they fear backlash from you. We're going to have to, some of us, it might even be some of us are going to have to make Caesar put the cuffs on us. You sure you want to do that, Julius? You sure, total state, you really want to do it? Because we're rolling, got my phone out, we're rolling tape. This is going to go viral. You sure you want the whole of the country to see you locking us up for what we believe? Because we're not changing. Just so you know, we're not changing what we believe. Right? So if you want to impose on us, is the juice worth the squeeze? May or may not be. There are plenty of eras and times in history where the total state says, I'm your Huckleberry, and does the deed, right? But then there are other times where the total state says, that's too much smoke, we're going to tap out, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately now you have a battle of wills. Right? I just put counter pressure on the landlords of this building. It turns out they may not care. They may not, right? They may be like, screw you. Okay. Then we'll vacate this premises as soon as we absolutely can, and or I'll just do the show from my home via Skype every day until the weather gets consistently below 60 degrees outside when bees are no longer a problem, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, but there's no way to know how much leverage and pressure I have on them until I do what? Exert it. I have to exert it. If I don't exert it, we never know, right? It's very clear. Has the landlord of this building proven they really ultimately don't care about my well-being and safeguard as a tenant here? Have they made that patently clear for the last few years?
It would seem so.
Yeah. At the very least, the kindest thing I can say is the standard of the landlord of this building's definition of the safeguard of your tenants is a heck of a lot looser than my own. That's the very least we could say if we're being kind. Fair? Fair. All right. So we're somewhere between a completely different definition of providing a safe environment for a rent-paying tenant to just no regard for the safety of your rent-paying tenant at all. But we're somewhere between those two things, right? Which would put us where? In a negative world, right?
Yeah.
Which means I have to exert counter pressure. The counter pressure may result in nothing. And in that case, time to go. Time to go somewhere else, make other arrangements, right?
Yes.
Time to, that's when Puritans jump on Mayflowers, right? That's when Christians flee to Petra, right? All right. When it's very clear, all right, the counter pressure won't work. That's when it's time to go. That's when patriots declare independence. The counter pressure doesn't work. The Tea Party protests don't work. The Sons of Liberty protests don't work. Okay. Time to go, or in the case of the revolution, time to go. Know what I'm saying, brother? But either way, it's going to be time to go one way or the other, right? Okay. But you don't know until you exert pressure. What you learned from Donald Trump this weekend is that, and it's good news, and it's a credit to him. He can be pressured on something. If you're really upset about marijuana, you can try it. You may not like the response you're going to get, okay? But at least on the life issue, for everybody that was mad at Lila Rose and Ali Stuckey, they improved Trump's odds of winning this election with what people like them did last week, putting pressure on Trump. Because you're talking about the largest, most loyal voting bloc in the Republican Party for the last 4 decades, pro-lifers. To have anything, when Kamala Harris, who is the first presidential candidate to visit a crematorium for babies on the campaign trail, she's the first one. When that's their alternative, when she's the alternative, there is no excuse not to have max turnout of that most loyal,
correct,
and vast voting bloc, correct?
Yeah.
But he was in danger of not getting that by his own actions, correct?
Absolutely.
And when we say not getting that, we're talking 2-3 points. But I got to tell you, in the overtime today, I'm going to go through my latest election map with the election nine weeks from today. I'm just going to tell you right now, 2-3 points, brother, go make a huge difference of pretty much every major voting bloc in America here in 9 weeks from today. That absolutely the difference between getting 54% of the Catholic vote and getting 56 might be the difference in you taking the oath of office in January or not. Straight up right there. Okay? And so to his credit, he listened. Well, he didn't do it for the right reasons. A lot of people don't do things for the right reasons. If you're the one husband who has always made sure to love your wife as Christ loved the church, and it wasn't because you wanted to have sex tonight. It wasn't because I don't want to hear it when I get home from work. It wasn't because I just, if you're the one husband who did that perfectly every single time, Jesus should call you home now. You've arrived. You've done it better than the rest of us. And it works the other way too. There's lots of times in life we have to get people to do the right things when they don't really want to. There's nothing wrong with doing the right thing for the wrong reasons at all. In fact, sometimes that's an act of faith. I mean, if I'm certain all the time acting on the will of God will give me some form of benefit, is there any faith in that, Todd? No. Because my definition of benefit's not probably going to be the same as God's.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So acting on faith all the time, on the certainty that God will bless me and reward me in some way I understand as a finite human and is tangible to me, there's no reward in that. There's no great act of faith in that. The act of faith is acting on it when you're not certain. Otherwise, it wouldn't be what? Faith. So if Donald Trump is not going to defend life in his home state, because he fears God, give him credit that he'll do it because at least he fears you. I don't know if you guys have noticed recently, but there's no shortage of politicians in the Republican Party who won't listen to their base at all. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter how much you pressure. He's one of the few that still will listen. Now, this took longer to force than it should have. I agree. But ultimately, did he listen? Yes.
I hear so.
So thank him. Thank you for listening to us. So here's another lesson you learned. Politics is a participatory sport. It is not, I go home from work, I watch Fox News all day, and then I go vote once every 4 years, and I just hope everything goes well. That's not, no. So the more you're heard, the better your, this was also a very simple message. Like, that's the key here, too. If it was a broad pro-life message, a lot of things would have gotten lost in the interpretation. What does that even mean? Okay? And let's face it, we don't have a lot of great pro-life leadership right now either, right? Okay. Right. But this is very simple. Amendment 4, yes or no. Everybody knows what it says. Everybody knows who's behind what it says. And that's the other thing you need, too, is a simple, not necessarily easy, but a simple ask. Well, I need you to be pro-life. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? We don't even know on the pro-life side right now. No, here's the simple ask. That's an abomination in your home state. We probably can't beat it unless you say no, and we need you to say no if you want us to say yes. That's a simple transaction, right?
It turned out, yes.
And ultimately, he listened and said, sold. You got yourselves a deal. What have you been screaming you've been wanting Trump to do for the last 2 weeks on this, Todd, from that chair?
I don't need to even need you to be churchy. I just need you to be the expert of art of the deal.
Yes, do you even art of the deal, bro? How many times have you said that the last couple of weeks?
Too many.
Well, he did. Now you found out that he does. Okay? But here's what you need. You need to participate in the process, not sit here with your arms folded and furrowed browed. Participate, number one. Number two, what's the ask? A very specific and simple ask. And then, Jesus tells a parable, right? About the persistent knockers, right? Keep knocking on that door. It works. Trump listened. Everybody wins. Now let's go win 9 weeks from today. More in a moment. right, back here on the Steve Deace Show, powered by our friends over at realestateagentsitrust.com. In these unprecedented times.
I don't have enough Bings at this point, quite frankly.
No.
I just don't.
No, there are not, my friend. You're correct. In these unprecedented times, make sure that you would dare not go into this real estate market. My oldest daughter, Anastasia, was looking at potential houses for her and her husband, Stephen, and their daughter, Autumn, over the weekend. And, I mean, houses were selling in more exurban areas for more than what we bought our house for right next to the largest mall in West Des Moines 18 years ago. Around the block of in my neighborhood, just down the street from where I live, a house is selling for almost twice what we bought our house for in that same neighborhood 18 years ago. Now, throw on top of that the massive increase in mortgage payments since 2021 when this regime took over. You are dealing with, on top of the level of taxation we're seeing, the value of the dollar, the decline of discretionary income, you are seeing perhaps the most complicated and difficult housing market in American history right now. So with all that being said, it is more important than ever before that you go into it with an agent you can trust. Where would you find one? Well, we made the website so simple that the name says it all. Head to realestateagentsitrust.com. Once again, that's realestateagentsitrust.com. We'll hook you up with an agent there whose track record we have verified and validated for success. Otherwise, we wouldn't be listing them. And a lot of times they come here from right in the audience as well. Realestateagentsitrust.com is where you want to go, whether you got to go across town or across the country. Do not go into this real estate market until you go to realestateagentsitrust.com. Let's welcome in our good friend, investigative reporter here at The Blaze, Steve Baker. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. And let me help you with this real estate problem for your daughter, because I just spent a week in Minneapolis investigating real estate prices. And so I've got some great deals up there in the Somali neighborhoods. I'm talking about pennies on the dollar, man.
I saw some of that growing up in Michigan, in Detroit. I've seen some examples of what you're talking about there. Indeed, not places where I want my granddaughter raised, but yeah, you get some great deals. That is for sure.
Exactly.
Let's start with the story that a lot of our audience first got to know you through and your work on, and ultimately how you got connected with us here at The Blaze, and that's on January 6th.
Yeah.
Are you surprised this has not been more of a story during this campaign? That the Democrats spent 3 years concocting a narrative here on this, and it's largely gone from most of the campaign messaging on the other side. Why do you think that is? And how much of that do you think is because of some of the work people like you and others have done, pushing back on some of the regime's ham-fisted narrative here?
Well, interestingly, I was at the DNC in Chicago, a couple of weeks ago. I was there the whole week, and we never heard anything about January 6th the entire time. In my private conversations, I was kind of embedded in one of the big hotels there where a lot of the delegates were congressmen, senators, and some other dignitaries from the DNC were staying. And we had conversations every single night in the bars, the restaurants, and the lounges, and the coffee shops, and trying to get a sense and a feel for all that was going on and what they're thinking. And J6 never came up at all. I like your theory or your hypothesis that possibly it's some of the work that some of us have been doing, have been able to dismantle some of the narratives, and maybe they're not quite as apt or prone to want to bring it up because they know that there are question marks, and they have to have their own question marks as well. Now I'm in D.C. I'm actually here to cover a trial this week for one of the more important trials, I think, of all of the January 6th defendants. And it's another one that they don't want the story going out about. We're talking about an individual, 23-year former Green Beret. He was the FBI tried to recruit him as a CHS, a confidential human source, back in November before January 6th. And he told them to pound sand, but he also recorded the recruitment effort and then published it on his podcast. And as a result of that, the FBI decided to punish him. And they raided his house and did a search on an illegal search warrant. The very one, this is the case I told you about months ago, Steve, that you helped me get in touch with the Florida AG. This is the one where the assistant Florida AG came out of his chair when I showed him the warrant, and he saw that it was illegal. They haven't done anything about it. That's another story in itself. But the point being is this is the trial, the DC version of the trial. They've already convicted him in Florida after the FBI planted evidence at his home. Now he's on his DC trial. He never entered the Capitol. He actually saved a woman's life that day. He did no violence, no damage, no property damage, never went inside, and now he's facing his January 6th related charges.
What's the penalty that the feds are going for here with him?
They've already hit him with a 7-year sentence for what they did to him in Florida on the illegal search. Now they have him up here on his J6 charges, and they're trying to bring in to the trial the fact that he was an oath keeper after post his military career, as many of them are. He became an oath keeper. Never went inside, was not engaging with the others. He was not a part of the conspiracy. But now they're the government is bringing in all of the conspiracy accusations that he was part of that and working with those who were convicted of seditious conspiracy.
Can I ask you a totally unfair question?
I get asked them every day. Go ahead, Steve.
I can't keep up with all of this, and I get asked about this with my audience as well. Okay. Do you trust the shipwrecked lawyer guy, and do you trust this Kyle Seraphin guy?
I trust them both.
You do?
I trust, absolutely. Shipwrecked is one of my attorneys. He's one of my 5 attorneys. In fact, he is my lead attorney. I trust him implicitly, and I'll give you several reasons if you wanted to, but I don't think I need to. The bottom line is that I've watched his work. He's been the most successful of all the J6 attorneys in terms of mitigating the sentencing process. He's also had a couple of acquittals, which is unheard of. And as a result of that, I identified him very early on as one of the guys that I would like to have on my team. And even though I had not reached out to him yet, he actually contacted me and said, you know who I am and what I do and what I'm capable of. And I said, yes, I was planning on reaching out to you. So we've established that relationship, and it's a good relationship. I trust him implicitly. And he's got great political instincts as well. So that's the first case. The second one, Kyle Seraphin. Look, I have spent a lot of time with Kyle. He is one of those quintessential guys that had he stayed in the FBI, had the FBI been smart enough to keep him as a special agent, he is the quintessential old school Robert Stack, Efren Zimbalist Jr. or Jack Webb, just the facts man kind of guy. He's basically largely apolitical. He just wants the facts, and he doesn't care where the facts leads him. And of course, because he's a former Fed and because he is a whistleblower, there are a lot of people out there, because of some of the things and some of the reveals that he has brought to the public recently against maybe somebody that a lot of people on our side likes, that he has been denounced as a Fed. I'm telling you that he's not. He's a good man. He loves the Lord. He's got a great family, and I trust him implicitly.
So you don't think Kyle Seraphin is a PSYOP, double agent, an informant? Nothing like that.
No, he's one of those guys who lost everything. And you know what the first thing he stood up against, Steve? You know why he's not on the job today? Is he stood up against the vaccine. He refused to take the jab as an FBI agent, and he was one of a coalition of about 300 agents that bound together and started their own chat group and started supporting one another in their efforts to fight this illegal mandate inside their agency. That's how he started.
Let's go back to your case. Now, to play devil's advocate, that's a hell of a narrative to start, if you're the feds, that's a hell of a narrative to start an informant PSYOP with. But that's the problem with this era. We can just go back and forth over and over and over again on these kinds of things, and ultimately, what is or what isn't objectively true. I knew you had some personal experience with these individuals. I get asked about this all the time. I don't know. I know a lot about the COVID subculture from the last few years and who's a crank and kind of who's not, but I don't know anything about this subculture on J6 at all. So I don't. That's why I'm deferring to you, because you're the only person I know facing prison for reporting on this. Okay. And so I kind of think you have some skin in the game, at least, so that's why I'm asking you. I don't know. That brings me to your case. Where are we at with it?
Wow. We've actually done some work on it in the last 24 hours on motions that we're filing. We are filing a motion dismiss based upon selective prosecution. We're still waiting on the appeals of my right to carry a firearm to protect myself when I'm journeying across the country, as often as I do. And we haven't heard back from the appellate court on that yet. The government has responded, and of course they're opposed to that. They will respond, and they will be opposed to our motion to dismiss. But as I've mentioned before, we've identified somewhere in between now 60, maybe even as many as 100 other journalists who entered the Capitol that day, and irrespective of who they were. We're talking about freelancers. We're talking about independents. We're talking about people that did not have press badges, all manner of journalists. The only ones who have faced prosecution so far are those who submitted their stories to the right, or maybe independently their voice is on the right side of the political spectrum, as is mine. And so those are the only ones facing prosecution. And we're going to demand that the government answer why the rest of these have not been prosecuted. They have not been interrogated. They've not been charged. They've not gone through the gauntlet of this, two-tiered hypocritical justice system that we're facing right now, and make them answer for individual cases. And we're going to pile it on.
How much does the Supreme Court verdict from a couple of months ago on this bolster your case? How much of that is how much of that is also, back to our previous discussion, why they're not pushing this narrative anymore, because the Supreme Court basically said they were guilty of prosecutorial abuse in that ruling. Yeah.
It has no bearing on my case whatsoever. I was not charged with the 1512 obstruction of an official proceeding charge. They tried. They wanted to get that on me. They took me before a grand jury, not personally, but they presented my case to a grand jury, and the grand jury just didn't even see it. So despite the government's efforts to punish me for poking them in the eye the last 3.5 years, they were not able to pull that off. So I'm only facing the 4 basic misdemeanor charges, not that one. But yes, you're correct. This is one of their most substantial losses and black eyes that they've taken in that this entire January 6th process for over 3.5 years was the 1512 being struck down by the Supreme Court.
Why were you in Minnesota? Can you tell us?
Yeah.
What are you investigating there?
Well, we have a VP from there now.
I heard. Yeah.
Right. We've got Tampon Tim up there, and there's a lot of damage that he has done to the community and to the state at large. And so I specifically got on, and this was just one of those things that I fall into on occasion. I got on the scent of a story of some business leaders up there who are being devastated by the policies, and particularly, as you led into my segment here today, the real estate issues. Look, I've been told that these guys, they can't find properties that are safe and safe communities that they can even afford to maintain their businesses that they've had in the family for 3 generations. They're looking for new properties, but every time they find something they can afford, I'm talking about $4 per square foot, all in, net, and plus a year free rent for a company with 200 employees in an office building largely abandoned, but nobody will take the deal because of the Somali neighborhood that it's next to. Nobody will take the deal. We're talking about a building that was originally constructed for $147 million, just went up for auction. Could not sell it for a $10 million offer.
Wow.
Still set. This is what's happening. You don't hear a lot of this in the news, and I can continue telling stories like that, but I did a lot of work over the last several days. I was in the Somali neighborhoods. I visited a couple of mosques. I went into their restaurants. I went into their coffee shops. I did some videoing, some openly, some surreptitiously, but did a lot of work in that regard. Also went and revisited the George Floyd Square. I've been there before. before, but I went back to survey what's going on there now, and then as well as Lake Street and the 4.5 years or 4 years later, the still the damage that has not been taken care of since that riotous destruction back in the Summer of Love in 2020.
Great stuff, Steve. Appreciate your work, brother. Appreciate you. Let us know if you need anything from us. All right. God bless you.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate it.
You bet. And guys, I go back again to that speaking engagement I did up in Minneapolis in March for a banquet for conservative members of the state legislature, and just how demoralized they were by what Tim Walz had done to their state and the Democrats had done to their state with the slimmest of margins in the legislature, and how they just had turned it into California in just a matter of months. And how many times I heard, again, this is a state Ronald Reagan couldn't win twice. So they're used to taking L's, okay? And even they were like, I don't know that we'll ever recover from what the Walz era, what the Walz era did to us here in Minneapolis. Your thoughts on that discussion with Steve?
Well, yeah, one of these days I do plan on getting some folks on from the Greater Idaho movement, but there's going to have to be like a Greater Dakotas movement or something like that. I mean, really, because this is Minneapolis, as it is in all other many other states, lording utter chaos on the rest of the people. And if you're living in rural Minnesota, you're a hostage. You're an absolute hostage to what amounts to an out of control, not only just Minneapolis at large, to a Somali neighborhood. The fact that this isn't people just torches and pitchforks, which is one of my great frustrations. Isaiah 1, where would you yet be struck? How do we tolerate this? Yet we do.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible to kind of further illustrate that point. I can't remember the exact, so I'm going to paraphrase this to try to get the impact. But I believe this is not a stat that should even exist. It should not even exist. I believe when ISIS was a thing, and it still is, but when it was a big bad, Minnesota was like the nation's number one exporter of people joining ISIS. That's not a good stat. That's not a stat to be number one on. And yet, Minnesota nice, like Iowa nice, whatever is going on up there. In the rural areas, I've got a really good friend of mine who lives in a rural area of Minnesota. It is like Alabama red. It's like Alabama red. Mm-hmm. He had to get after one of the kids in his youth group for coming to youth group with an FJB sweatshirt on at church. That's how red it is. And yet, in Minneapolis, that's really all that matters. It is Illinois light. The machine in that big city metropolis, it runs everything else.
Yeah, that's a lot of states in America nowadays, though. Mm-hmm. Yep. 2 or 3 cities, and the rest of the state is Alabama. Yeah, not a long-term way to keep a culture together.
No.
Hour 2 is next. Literally risking my life for America as we begin hour 2 of this show, and that's only a slight exaggeration. I am Steve Deace. He is Todd Erzin. He is Aaron McIntyre. I asked Todd during that break if we salvaged anything at all in that first hour. Aaron's computer is just now working. And you told me no. No, it was a complete and utter disaster.
Not quite.
We salvaged nothing. Nothing.
It was programming.
Yeah, it was. That's what it was. Programming. Indeed. Let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. You can email me, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook, me, we, and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show on X, Getter, Instagram, and TikTok. Also, if you are a podcast listener, if you wouldn't mind, leave us a 5-star review if you like the show. Thank you if you have done that. We appreciate it. You can also make sure if you're a podcast listener, hit subscribe, or if you're on iTunes, it's follow. That way, every time you do that, every time we do a new show, if you do that, it will show up in your feed every single time. And we thank all of you that have done that for us. as well. This part of the show brought to you by our friends over at Constitution Wealth. Don't let your retirement dollars become a weapon against everything you hold dear. Let Constitution Wealth become your financial fortress, helping you defend your values with every single one of your dollars. That's why so many of our loyal listeners have already reached out to Constitution Wealth, the Patriot's choice in wealth management. And here's how they can help empower you to take a stand. You can secure your family's future with a rock-solid investment plan, but while also reducing the grip that ESG and DEI and other demonic woke schemes have on your investments. This way, it helps you to also divest from corporations that are mocking and trying to undo your values. And you can fight the culture war if you do this with maybe the most powerful weapon you have, your own investments. And that also helps, by the way, to build the parallel economy we all need, because now you're working with and for an investment firm composed of professionals who are patriots just like you. You can't beat it, folks. So take action now. Visit constitutionwealth.com/blaze. Sign up for a free consultation today. That's constitutionwealth.com/blaze. Sign up for a free consultation today at constitutionwealth.com/blaze. All right. Idolatry or not, we're going to do something a little bit different this week. I want to look at a talking point. And I want to flesh out, is it a false objection, therefore it's idolatry, or is it a really strategic nuance we need to consider? Okay? And it's funny, like the only issues, you ever notice the only issues that ever comes up with this stuff, like there is no one on the right with any significant platform at all saying, I think we just should let the Second Amendment be a state issue, whether we're going to have the Second Amendment or not. Well, Steve, the Second Amendment is in the Constitution. So is the right to life, moron. It's in the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It's right, and it's in the same Bill of Rights that your Second Amendment is in. It's in the same one. U.S. Constitution. Did I say the state constitution?
No.
I said the U.S. Constitution. No person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And, you know, I was fascinated. I just chose not to push back, and I want to win. And I'll push back on things when I think Trump is doing things that'll cost us a win, like unnecessarily alienating a bunch of pro-life voters. I thought that was going to cost us a win. So I pushed back. If I've just got disagreements with some of our peers and stuff, even some of our friends, I don't think that beyond that, I just don't think right now, because I want to win, the juice is worth the squeeze if we're just having a disagreement. Okay. But some of you have contacted me. Oh yeah, I noticed friends of mine even, that I can just promise you, if the Trump administration had said, we're just going to, Israel is an Israel issue, not an us issue. We're just going to leave Israel's on its own, you know, whatever it wants to do with Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, not our fight. The same stuff they were saying about the abortion, the baby killing issue, they wouldn't be saying it about Israel.
Right.
I saw some of that. And I saw this with lots of other issues. And there's a reason why. I mean, I've noted before, the only two organizations in America that people actively look to join without sharing the stated worldview of the organization is the Christian Church and the Republican Party. They're the only two. No one joins any other organization attempting to, because they don't agree with its values, but because they do. The only two organizations people actively seek to be a part of while not agreeing with its stated purpose and mission are the Republican Party and the Christian Church. And when those two things intersect, we're the ones often told, hey, just sit down. You got the numbers. We can't win without you, but just shut up anyway. Well, thankfully, a few people like Lila Rose and Ali Stuckey didn't shut up and put enough pressure on Trump that he stopped himself from making a mistake that may have cost us an election. As I'll point out in the overtime today, this thing 9 weeks from today, you guys know I love doing analysis and predictions. I got nothing. I mean, I'm even looking for, like, we were talking during the break, Aaron, like I'm even looking for like anecdotal, circumstantial stuff, you know? All right, what about, ecosystem stuff? Like, and both sides are like, we're in trouble, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, both sides are. Both, I mean, I didn't like some of the trends from our perspective when I looked at them over the weekend. So I'm like, well, what do they think? someone over and looked at their stuff. They're like openly saying in their media, hey, we cooked these polls and you don't have a big enough lead to withstand his hidden vote. I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen 9 weeks from today.
This is the schizo election.
It is. I really don't know. I don't know. But we do have a state battle on abortion right now. We cannot deny that. The primary, not singular, but the primary focus politically of the issue right now is at the state level. We have to wage war there because that's where we're being attacked, right? I mean, we can hide out behind our Maginot line in Washington D.C. and well, it's just a federal issue, and then we can watch them pass more garbage amendments like they did in Michigan and Ohio, and do it this time in Missouri and Florida and a bunch of other places, right? So we do have to fight where we're being attacked. You have to defend where you're being attacked. You cannot defend where you want to defend. You have to defend where you're actually being attacked. We are being attacked at the state level. So there is clearly some truth to the notion that this battle right now does reside in the states. There is truth to this. I'm not denying that, okay? The question I want to wrestle with here in idolatry or not, though, is if there is no federal place for this issue at all. Because that argument is being made here too. And how much of that is a legit argument, and then how much of that is a false objection? Meaning that even in our diminished state as a movement on the pro-life side, there still isn't a lot of money and political grift to be earned on the right by being openly in favor of killing babies. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not a profitable message on the right to just say I'm totally fine with it. And so knowing that, how many people that are saying, we'll just leave this to the states, really believe that and may have a nuanced strategic view that we should listen to? And then how many are just saying this because that's the new cop-out, like when a bunch of people after Windsor and Dobbs claimed to be libertarians and they weren't. All right. They just didn't want to argue about gay marriage anymore because they thought it was a losing issue. And they didn't want to just come right out and say, I'm fine with, destroying marriage. So to that end, I have this note. Now, it is lengthy. But if I didn't think it was good, I wouldn't spend this much time on it. All right. I have this note from Patrice Householder. She lives in Manassas, Virginia. All right. She writes, part of my job for the National Pro-Life Alliance involves contacting every Republican House and Senate candidate in the country to try to get them to return our 10-question candidate survey. We then mail to support them in their districts when we get 100% pro-life surveys back from them. We do this during the primaries to push a truly pro-life candidate to the front of the pack. And then we do it in the general, mobilizing voters for pro-life candidates running against abortion-on-demand extremists with deep war chest filled by NARAL, that's the National Abortion Rights Action League, Big Labor, and Planned Parenthood, which means they're also using our tax dollars against us. I talk with the candidates themselves and with their campaign staff. The vast majority of them have declined to complete and return the survey, making some version of this statement, quote, the Supreme Court has returned the abortion issue to the states where it belongs. Now, even if that is the place where the issue should be ultimately decided, if you believe that, okay, does that mean we don't care what the people we elect to federal office think about the sanctity of life or the right to life? See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like she's saying she is saying these candidates are not saying, I am pro-life and have a pro-life voting record. But in light of the fact the Supreme Court has returned the abortion issue to the states, that's where the fight is relegated at the moment. Something like that, right? They're not even willing to give their position on the issue. So right away, this is a false objection if that's you, right? If that's you, because if you're pro-life, you're going to want to own it. And you're going to want people to know that because you have a conviction, right? So I would say right away to every candidate for office that this was their answer to Patrice and the National Pro-Life Alliance. That's absolutely idolatry. It's a false objection. I will go so far as to say none of the people who wrote that answer are pro-life. And that even if they voted pro-life before, it was just a facade to protect themselves because they also probably didn't think the issue would go anywhere because of Roe v. Wade. So it was the perfect issue to pretend to be pro-life on, because Roe v. Wade was there and nothing would ultimately happen. So you could just lie to a bunch of gullible pro-life voters. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. By refusing to return the survey, they are dismissing a very significant number of votes, Patrice says, the kinds of numbers that determine the winners, especially in House races. She is correct. Again, this is the largest and most loyal voting bloc the Republican Party has had for the last 40 years. Now, it won't be that way forever. And we may find out this cycle it's not that way right now. That could be true, right? Like you like to say, Todd, the status quo is the status quo until it isn't anymore. But we need to see the status quo change before something isn't status quo, right?
Yes.
All right. And ultimately, it would require bucking an over 40-year trend in elections for Republicans to not pay a price for not being willing to stand with their pro-life base. And when you're talking about, I mean, how many of those House races in 2022 came down to recounts, came down to, absentee ballots 2, 3, 4 days later? How many days did it take to find out who even controlled the House? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're talking about a lot of races where this kind of vote, again, 2 or 3 points of people that you don't speak to their number one issue or convictions, cost you the House maybe, right? So if you know this, and you are still giving this answer, you're not pro-life. You won't even art of the deal, as you said, right?
Right.
You have no personal conviction. This is a false objection now. You're an idolater. You're totally fine with the murdering of children. Well, Steve, they could be cowards. Cowards are actually the first idolaters thrown into the lake of fire in the book of Revelation. So in the kingdom of God, in God's economy, how good of an excuse is cowardice, guys?
It's a bad one.
It's a bad one. It's a non-starter. We're talking about a Lord that faced torture beyond recognition on behalf of his people, right? And then execution on behalf of his people, correct?
Yeah.
And then he handed his spirit to church fathers who also all faced some form of persecution, if not murder, for their faith, right? And it was the blood of the martyrs that was the seed of the early church. I think it's Origen or Eusebius, if I recall, made that statement. All right. So cowardice is not an option within the Christian work ethic, the Christian ethic. Yeah, it's just simply not on any level at all. It's not an acceptable excuse. Cowardice is treated as traitorous in the biblical worldview.
Because it's not an emotion, it's a decision.
Correct.
Ultimately.
Correct. Patrice writes, we mail the information about which candidates in a particular district are pro-life and which are not. 3 million of them across the country. This is not an insignificant enterprise that Patrice is a part of. 3 million. They are the hardcore individuals who donate to us, sign our petition, support our legislative agenda. They are firmly pro-life individuals who turn out faithfully if there is a truly pro-life candidate to vote for. Because my job also involves member services. I speak with many of those individuals as well throughout the year. Many of them say they will not only refuse to vote for pro-choice candidates, but they will also refuse to vote for candidates who remain silent on the issue. In this 2024 cycle, that is a lot of candidates that will not be getting these people's votes. In fact, the statement that the Supreme Court returned the abortion issue to the states is not an accurate one, Patrice says. That is not what the Dobbs decision did, and our opponents understand this. The left understands very clearly that abortion is not a state issue. They are not standing down. They are not leaving the issue to the states, and they have no intention of doing so. They are pushing extreme federal legislations that would override every existing state protection. Remember, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. The results will be the same. If you like your abortion ban, you can keep your abortion ban. The left is working aggressively on federal action to obliterate every pro-life protection. In fact, Kamala Harris is openly running on this. She's openly running on this right now. The Women's Health Protection Act is the bill with the most sweeping and radical scope of them all, Patrice says. It passed the House in 2023. That means it passed with a Republican majority, folks. Passed with a Republican majority. It will become law if the left holds the White House and the Senate. That is correct. This session's iteration of that bill would enshrine unfettered abortion access into federal law and would retroactively and prospectively eliminate every protection for life at all levels of government. It would dismantle existing state protections put in place by duly elected legislators, litigated all the way to the Supreme Court and found to be constitutional by that body. It would eliminate every existing state abortion limit, from ultrasound and waiting period requirements to parental notification rules and doctor or facility qualifications. And it would ban all future protections for life at all levels of government. There's also the brutal Federal Abortion on Demand Until Birth Act on the table, which Schumer and Pelosi are pushing aggressively. They both have threatened to eliminate the filibuster in order to ram this through if they win. And it's not just the threatened pending future federal actions like those bills that demonstrates the federalness of the abortion issue. The Biden-Harris administration has already taken and is currently taking sweeping federal action to push its extreme abortion agenda on the entire country, including the states that have attempted to put limits on abortion. Here's just a quick little off the top of my head sample of Biden-Harris executive branch decisions from the last 3.5 years. 1, they greenlighted the FDA to erase its own medical safety protocols for abortion drugs, to clear the drugs for mail order delivery, to essentially set up national pharmacy chains as de facto community abortion mills. They also did this to classify pregnancy as a disease. They weaponized taxpayer funding by threatening to withhold Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements from pharmacies that refuse to dispense chemical abortion drugs. They have selectively applied the FACE Act to send pro-life protesters to jail while prosecuting none of the 500 fire bombings and other attacks on Catholic churches and the 90 violent assaults on pregnancy centers and their staff that have taken place in the last 3 years. They brought the Department of Defense to the abortion table, forcing taxpayers to foot the bill for extra paid leave and general travel allowances for DOD employees to kill and murder their children. White House counsel and the U.S. Attorney General are putting together attorney teams and level organizations to represent baby killers and patients who run afoul of states with pro-life protections in place. They announced their plan to use the Federal Trade Commission to fine crisis pregnancy centers out of existence for false advertising of abortion during of abortion drug reversal and for refusing to offer abortion as one of the choices for their clients. The White House and Congress have a legislative executive action effort already well underway and well funded to completely destroy the independence and function of the Supreme Court and lower courts as well. Patrice says taxpayer funding of abortion is another federal abuse and requires federal curtailment. Then she goes on to list numerous examples of the Biden administration using federal tax dollars to fund the killing of babies. She goes on to say, therefore, federal action is not just appropriate, but necessary because the 14th Amendment's existence in the U.S. Constitution, that amendment is declared a federal interest in the protection of life. What's the 14th Amendment? You may have heard it referred to as equal protection under the law. It's part of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that were ratified as a package deal after the Civil War. All right. But the 14th Amendment is essentially an expansion and recodifying of the 5th Amendment. It includes the very same wording of the 5th Amendment that I quoted a little while ago. No person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And what the 14th Amendment originally did was expanded that to include blacks. They were now persons. By overturning Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court recognized that states and Congress have the power to protect the unborn. But in both Roe and Dobbs, the court acknowledged this entitlement to protection while declining to define who is a person and therefore who is entitled to protection under the law. So just as it required federal action to determine that people with dark complexions could not be deprived of life, it will require federal action to do the same for the unborn. Again, I want to make sure I give her credit here. That is from Patrice Householder, all right, from Manassas, Virginia, and she is with the National Pro-Life Alliance. Let me say one more thing here. The pro-life industry has a credibility problem. And as a general rule, if Lindsey Graham is pushing you, there's probably a credibility problem there, right? I mean, who has been the number one advocate of a 15-week federal abortion bill in elected office? Who's gone and spoke, including here in Iowa, all over the country about this? Lindsey Graham. The same Lindsey Graham who attacked us on the Cruz campaign and the Rand Paul campaign during the 2016 primary for being too pro-life. I don't think Lindsey Graham cares about the babies at all. He's demonstrated that many times throughout his career. I mean, how many times has Lindsey Graham voted for budgets that fund all this taxpayer-funded abortion that Patrice just itemized for us, right? Okay. What I think Lindsey Graham cares about is the grift. And there has been, what's happened here also is there's no more protection racket for Republican incumbents on the life issue. And that's why Patrice is seeing a bunch of candidates for Congress not return their questionnaires for the first time. Because now they're being asked to go on the record with stuff that could actually happen because Roe versus Wade was overturned. And so now we have to be truthful about who we really are. What Lindsey Graham wants is a 15-week bill that won't really protect or defend any babies. I mean, the percentage of babies it will protect and defend is minuscule. It will include every exception you can imagine. And then a woman will just go to Planned Parenthood, claim she was raped, and they'll kill her baby at any stage of development, like what was going on before. What he wants is a Republican incumbency protection racket for Republicans like him, who are fake on this issue and always have been. Because if we have a 15-week national ban, a bunch of Republicans who know it probably won't hold up in court or won't get signed by a Democrat president, they'll all vote for it, right? And then they'll all get to claim they're pro-life to a bunch of gullible pro-life voters around the country and get our votes only to then do nothing about the issue. In other words, if you're sincerely pro-life here, you're in the Mutara Nebula right now. All right, if you get it ain't Kobayashi Maru because we're on the side of the author of life. So there, and therefore there's no such thing as no-win scenarios in his math, right? Okay, yes. But we're in the Mutara Nebula, to continue with the Star Trek II Wrath of Khan analogy here. It's very murky, okay, and sensors aren't working. Okay, not everything's online. Is that your ship? Is that the Enterprise? Is that the Reliant? Are we firing on ourselves? Okay, everything's going by instinct or feel. That's a better analogy of where we are. All Lindsey Graham wants to do is restore the old Republican incumbency protection racket. He doesn't care about protecting babies. He's proven that. And so we're left here where he is a terrible proxy for this discussion. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I mean, to have Lindsey Graham front and center arguing that this remains a federal issue is the best way to make sure nothing federally ever happens on this issue. It gives everybody an out. Okay, who the hell wants to share a foxhole with Lindsey Graham? No self-respecting heterosexual male does. So we're caught between this in that nexus, right? Because the offer that is being made to a bunch of these Republicans to nationalize the issue, I wouldn't take the offer either, because I don't think the offer is legit. I think it's just to continue the grift. Let's just raise a bunch of money to continue celebrating a bunch of Mitch McConnells and whoever, McCarthy, Boehner, Mike Johnson, whoever the speaker is, a bunch of their hack candidates, incumbents, and they just get their pro-life We Below badge, right here on the jersey, and we just all keep voting for him even though nothing is done on the issue. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And that's one of the issues that we have here on this. I mean, Mike Pence trying to act like he's the conscience of this issue. Mike Pence let Debbie Birx kill how many people with lockdowns and the COVID No. He's not the champion of anything other than ankle grabbing, which is why him and Lindsey Graham make a great pair. Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Here's the problem. You didn't once mention any existence of a legitimate black-robed regimen in this argument, and that's the problem. And that's why tactically we're in a land of just percentages now on and that is just art of the deal as it applies to an upcoming election, but it's not sufficient for a long term. I mean, this is ultimately one of the most fundamental moral arguments you should be making, and therefore the church should be making it forcefully, but it's constantly corporately nowhere to be found. Obviously, the soldiers of the church are independently doing yeoman's work on this stuff. But whether it's at the state or federal level, this is a long-time loser because ultimately the agent that has to be the tip of the spear on it simply refuses to. The Catholic Church currently is led by Francis and bishops who are clearly willing to toe whatever line he's got on this. Right now, the Southern Baptist Conference is far more willing to go after Megan Basham than work to protect babies.
Correct.
The entire church is lost on this.
So you're asking Donald Trump to be better on this than the church?
That's dumb.
Or any politician for that matter.
That's dumb. Yeah. It's not only dumb, it's impossible.
Yep.
We've shown this. This is the tragedy of American compassion. We farmed these things out. And that's why that demon statue in Iowa thing was so important to me. It just shows it's time. It was like an invite. 100 pastors show up, just 100 show up and say, yeah, no. But they didn't do that. And they haven't been doing this on abortion and many other issues for a long time. So state or federal, it's all going to be a loser sooner or later, as long as the church won't be the church.
Correct. The answer to this question, is it a state or federal issue? The answer, of course, is yes, but it's already a federal issue. You already pointed out the 14th Amendment. The problem then becomes, who are we as a people? And by extension, who is the church as the church? And we are woefully lacking. If you're driving down the road, if you're driving down the interstate, it's completely flat. There are no places for a police officer to hide and put on a speed trap. Do you obey the speed limit? Probably not. You're probably going to go over 5-10 miles an hour over. If you see a police officer, what are you going to do? You're going to start putting on the brakes. Why?
Right.
Because you fear accountability. You fear accountability. So the law of the land is already, you cannot murder people. You can't murder people. But who's the accountability mechanism? It should be the church. It's not there. Until that changes, like Todd said, this is going to be a loser because the church, as it stands currently en masse in the United States, is a loser.
If you're upset that Trump is not sufficiently pro-life for you, and I will agree with you that Trump is not sufficiently pro-life, okay? But to this end, ask yourself this question. Are you going to a church right now that celebrated the overturning of Roe v. Wade? Are you going to a church where the pastor has to be begged to speak out even on something like Amendment 4 in your state, like Missouri, for example? Missouri has the largest non-LDS church population in America. Missouri does, per capita. Missouri does. Church-going population, I should say. How many of you go to churches where the pastor is involved in, I think it's Amendment 3 is the one in Missouri. That's their version of Amendment 4, I believe. How many? Because I've worked with a group in Missouri called Vitae, the Vitae Foundation. And what did I help them do earlier this year? Trying to get churches in Missouri more mobilized on this issue because they weren't sufficiently mobilized. I mean, ultimately, that's where where does the groundswell to pressure Trump on Amendment 4 come from? Lila's a Catholic, Allie's an evangelical. They have something else. They have something in common, though. Deep, abiding faith. And that's what drives their activism and why they were two of the leading voices here, right? So it seems to me if we're going to continue to have relevance in the political system, we need churches that generate more deep, abiding voices, more conviction.
Yeah, and now we just need to have another Moms for Liberty again. So if those are the two biggest voices, we have to ask again, so where are the men?
Where are the men?
Where are the leaders of these churches?
And by the way, they would be the leaders of almost all of these churches would be men.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. You know, I've told this story before about how I was all worked up over the Judge Roy Moore 10 Commandments thing when I first got saved. And I heard Adrian Rogers say, do you even have the 10 Commandments in your home? And it convicted me, right?
Yeah.
I made sure we bought those 10 Commandments that afternoon. Same question. If you're mad at Trump, you should be. He's not sufficiently pro-life. But are you going to a church and tithing to a church that isn't either? Ask yourself that first. For years, been sounding the alarm here about the corruption eating away at the country, but what you're about to witness, well, it's enough to make your blood boil. And we all remember the chaos of the COVID pandemic, the lockdowns, millions of hardworking Americans struggling to keep their heads above water, others who saw an opportunity to line their pockets with our tax dollars thanks to the Paycheck Protection Program. And that's what our next Blaze original documentary is all about. It's called Scamdemic, how fraudsters cashed in on billions. And it's not just an expose, it is a wake-up call. The Blaze digs into the murky world of PPP loans, showing you exactly how some people gamed the system while the rest of us were just trying to keep our lights on. Let me tell you what you're going to see. It's shocking, except it's exactly what you've come to expect from the mix of big government, big business, and a crisis. But there's more. The documentary doesn't just tell the story. It brings it to life with the help of our colleague, Alex Stein. With his no-holds-barred, in-your-face style, he gets to the heart of the matter. You do not want to miss this. So if you want to know more about where your tax dollars are being wasted, because you're just not mad enough yet, that should be the promo code. Mad enough. Anyway, you want to head over to blazeoriginals.com/Deace, blazeoriginals.com/Deace. Subscribe for a 7-day trial, plus get $30 off, I should say, with the promo code Scamdemic. You can watch this on Wednesday of this week. You'll be angry, you'll be informed, most of all, you'll be ready to take a stand. Again, you want to go blazeoriginals.com/Deace, promo code Scamdemic for $30 off. Promo code Scamdemic for $30 off at blazeoriginals.com/Deace. So we ran out of time. Let's render a final verdict here. I'm going to say the talking point that abortion is not a federal issue, because of what I said at the end, the entire grift of Big Baby and Lindsey Graham as the face, I'm going to be generous, okay? Because I am just telling you right now, I wouldn't sign on. I mean, I can't tell you how much I've lost over the years on my unwielding on this issue, okay? I'm not signing on to, Lindsey Graham's not doing a pro-life 15-week bill. He's doing a Republican incumbency protection racket. I'm a no. Not doing that. I'm not going to line up. I'm not going to sign on to something that has no chance of passing just so a bunch of Republicans who don't deserve public office and would murder all these babies if they had to in exchange for their for their pensions, their congressional pensions, get a Webelow badge and a force field of protection from people like us. I'm not signing on to that. Okay. So I'm going to say the ratio is, when people say abortion is just a federal issue, 60% idolatry, 40% a legit take for multiple different reasons. It's where the battle is happening, the current state of the national pro-life leadership, and having Lindsey Graham as your front man speaks volumes about what your goals really are, okay? So my final verdict, let's go around the room. I'm going to say 60% idolatry, 40% legit tactical take. Todd, what do you think?
Oh, I think to say it's not, I'd say it's about 90% idolatry. Ultimately, because it's not actually trying to look at all the pieces and look for something that's efficacious. It's ultimately looking for yet another reason to do nothing.
Okay. Aaron?
So that it's not a federal issue?
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes.
So I think it's 50-50. It has to be a both and. Now, are there a lot of people out there like what Todd just described? Absolutely. Too many in important places of power. But you have to look at this as both and. And so I think from what I have seen, I think it's more in line of 50-50, maybe 55-45, something like that.
Well, that segues us to Pop Culture Tuesday, when we look at the intersection between what's trending in pop culture and what we're trying to conserve as conservatives. And, I mean, the president, who was the tip of the spear to create really the modern Republican coalition and mobilize this alliance of Catholics and evangelicals for the first time around the life issue, was Ronald Reagan. And he remains to this day the only president who's ever written a book while he was in office. The name of that book? Abortion and the Conscience of a Nation. And he is someone that had essentially a Bernard Nathanson-like transformation on this issue. He started off being basically pro-choice, and then a combination of the science of seeing what was going on in utero. You got to remember, a lot of the in utero stuff that we take for granted nowadays was pardon the pun, was in its infancy at the time the abortion debate was at the vanguard of the abortion debate. I mentioned an organization last segment that Patrice noted, NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League. One of the founders of that organization was Bernard Nathanson. He went from helping to found NARAL to being the guy who produced the controversial documentary in the 1980s called Silent Scream, showing people what really went on with an abortion inside a woman's womb, basically what Unplanned did in the movie. Okay? But when he put it out there on Silent Scream, it was the first time anybody had really seen it. So like a lot of other people that didn't understand what was going on in utero, Reagan started off being somewhat between lax to modestly pro-choice to then becoming radicalized on the issue. And it was the signature issue that drove his entire coalition. Well, no, Steve, it was about defeating the Soviet Union. Now, that was Reagan's signature issue. But that was also Barry Goldwater's signature issue too, guys. When he ran on that, how'd he do? He got mollywopped, guys. Absolutely mollywopped in 1964 by LBJ. Mollywopped, okay? So that three-legged stool that Reagan had, fiscal conservatives who wanted to do something about inflation and the stagflation in the economy, and they wanted across-the-board tax cuts. Goldwater had all those people too. The national defense conservatives who were hawks against communism, Goldwater had all those people too. So what's the difference between 1964 and 1980? Well, we have a third stool in 1980 that we didn't have in 1964, and that was the Christian conservatives. And what was the driving issue that brought those people out and united them into a force? What was it? This one, life. And that's the difference between 1980 and 1964. Went and saw the Reagan movie. First of all, I got to give props to my friend John Sullivan. He was one of our producers on Nefarious. John is one of the producers for Reagan. John has now produced the two films in the history of Rotten Tomatoes with the widest score between what the audience thought and what the critics thought. Our movie Nefarious set the all-time... Now, there's documentaries that are much higher, but I'm talking feature films, okay? Our movie Nefarious previously held the record on Rotten Tomatoes for the widest feature film gap between the audience score and the critics score. It was something like, I think it was 98% on the audience and like 33% with the critics. So 66-point difference. That's the record at Rotten Tomatoes, which dates back to around 2002, 2003. All right? So we're talking a while, about 20 years. The Reagan film has shattered that record, guys. All right? We were Mark Spitz, all right, for about a year on Nefarious. This is now Michael Phelps, okay? Because the critic score on the Reagan film is 11% and the audience score on Reagan is 98%. That's an 87-point difference between what the audience thinks and what the critics think of the film. Having seen the film, I totally get it. Because faith is a central part of this film. You see the role the faith of Reagan's mother played in his early worldview development. You see how it played a huge part in his life later as an adult. And you see that Reagan saw Marxism and communism as basically a godless threat against his Christian worldview. That is portrayed all throughout the film. Overall, especially when you consider the budget that they had. I mean, if I remember right, John told me they made this movie for about $30 million, which is 10 times more of a budget than we had on Nefarious. But guys, I mean, Warner Brothers spent over $100 million making that Elvis biopic just a couple of years ago. So for a movie of this scope, where you are spanning the life of the most important Republican president of the United States of the entire 20th century, and you're depicting events that are happening global all over the world, you're going to have limitations for $30 million. Now, the movie looks great. It looks great. And there are some really slickly produced scenes, too, that look way above its budget. But much like Nefarious, where this movie soars is with the performances. Dennis Quaid is terrific, particularly as he gets into Reagan's presidential years, where he's now he's close to the age now that Reagan was then. The last hour of the film, the whole movie is captivating, but the last hour of the film, the third act, is by far its best, which is good because it's also the most important part of the story. It's hard to do spoilers because I would assume almost everybody knows what happens, right? Okay. But
how much time does this movie span?
His entire life, essentially. It starts from his childhood with an alcoholic father. It starts in his childhood from Dixon, Illinois, all the way to when he announces to the world, I think it was in 1994, 1995, that he had Alzheimer's and was retreating from public life. And just like with American Sniper, the closing credits show you the funeral of the soldier that the movie's about. The closing credits of this film show you the Reagan memorials. And it's very powerful and very moving. What I loved that this film did from a storytelling device is the MacGuffin of the plot is that Jon Voight, and Jon Voight is one of the great actors in history. I mean, he's won Oscars. Jon Voight is still the star of the only X-rated film that ever won Best Picture, Urban Cowboy. Okay, but X-rating meant something a little bit different back then than what we think of it now. But Jon Voight plays a retired KGB agent who he basically narrates the film. And he was an intelligence analyst for the KGB. And his job was to identify and then analyze emerging threats in the West to Soviet hegemony. And Reagan was one of the subjects that he began to analyze after Reagan started touring the country in the early 60s, to speak out against socialism and the Great Society. And so he serves as a narrator throughout the film. And the duopoly of Reagan and the Soviets. And it's a very effective storytelling device so that the movie doesn't just feel like you're watching a docudrama, but it brings more of a feature film element to it, and you see what the other side of the equation was thinking the entire time about him. It's really well done. The last act in particular is by far the strongest act, which is, again, the most important. But here's the thing, and Quaid is terrific, absolutely terrific in the role, as is Voight. It's also one of the most bittersweet cinematic experiences I've had in recent memory. Like, remember when we all went and saw Endgame?
Yeah.
And couldn't have done it better. I think you were like, they did it. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we all kind of were anywhere from worried to concerned to predicting, based on what Kevin Feige was saying, that they were going to try to go spirit of the age woke with what was going to come next. And we were like, it doesn't matter if they do that. We'll always have this. It's the perfect ending to the saga, right? The ending of Return of the King. And then the hobbits get their ending, and Aragorn gets his ending, and the elves and Bilbo get their, and Gandalf get their ending. I mean, it's just satisfying when it's over. I was unsatisfied when this movie ended. I was equal parts inspired to saddened. And I'm not sure the movie intended for this to be the case, but man, you really see how far we have fallen in the last generation as a people. The movie does show this. I think it's an unintended consequence. Because you're watching Jon Voight narrate what the Soviets were thinking, and it's exactly what the American left thinks today. And these are their own talking points, where they're using them against us as we speak. And, igniting racial division, infiltrating Hollywood. It's just... You see how far we have fallen as a people. And I think I came away believing I don't believe the country would respond to a leader like Reagan today. I don't. it would be cheesy, schmaltzy, naive. You know how I used to talk about why we keep making Batman movies over and over again? The perpetually broken hero. We much more identify with that than the altruistic hero like Superman, for example. Okay? That's kind of what I'm going for here. I think a guy who, as much as you can as a sinner, largely operated politically, altruistically. I just, even when he was wrong, he was largely operating altruistically. I think that gets laughed off the stage today. We're the era of, actually, the Jews did it. Actually, Churchill was the bad guy, didn't you know, all these years? We're those people now. The idealism that Reagan called the country to and the country responded to, I don't think we're capable of that. I don't, sadly. And so it was pretty bittersweet. You guys have any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, and yet we're somehow expecting Donald Trump to take whatever vestiges that are left and be the mouthpiece for that. Yeah, that's a rough sell. That is a really rough sell.
Donald Trump is much more symbolic of the era in which we live than Ronald Reagan is. I mean, I'm just telling you right now, I think Trump would beat Reagan straight up in a primary. He's much more a byproduct of the voting public than Ronald Reagan is.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't even think it's close.
The only place Reaganism seems to be working is down in Florida with DeSantis.
And even then, they almost voted for a guy who was doing cocaine off a gay hooker's ass.
There's that.
They almost voted for that guy instead. See what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. We're going to stick around and do overtime. For the rest of you, we'll see you tomorrow. Until then, Romans 8:28.